Chapter 7 Making Promises. Everything was different. Once sunset opened up to crystal clear, she noticed an immediate change in how she felt. She didn't have nightmares anymore, her mood swings had largely stopped. Even her outlook on dealing with other kids was better. Suddenly, everything fell into place. All the stupid things she had to deal with were all temporary, just unimportant things she would handle one day at a time. Talking with Crystal Clear became something to look forward to every week. It wasn't just that it was liberating to finally talk about Equestria after so long away either. That was definitely part of her excitement, but even more importantly, he had said he could help her find her way home. She had no doubt he had his own reasons, but that wasn't a problem. Naturally, he would want to see this other world with its magic, and even if he wanted monetary compensation, that should prove simple enough. Sure, bits wouldn't help him much, but Princess Celestia could easily arrange a reward of gold or valuable gems. The thought broke through her good mood. Sunset had been feeling cheerful as always while she waited for Rose Petal to take her to her weekly appointment, but as always she found mixed feelings rushing back to her at the memory of her former mentor. What would she do if Sunset returned? When, Sunset reminded herself. What would Celestia do when she returned, not if? Because she was returning to Equestria, even if it was going to take years. There was no way to know what Celestia would do. She had always been patient and forgiving in the past, but she had also dismissed Sunset from her tutelage. Would an apology still be enough? There was no way of knowing, so she was better off not thinking about it. Before that could even be a concern, Sunset would have to find her way home. "All right, let's get going," Rose Petal said, snapping Sunset from her thoughts. She was smiling happily, the way she did before the past few appointments with Crystal Clear. Everyone was happy with Sunset's change in attitude, but none more so than Rose Petal. Okay. Sunset followed Rose Petal out to her van. It had been over a month since Sunset found herself living with humans, and finally she seemed to be getting used to their world. For example, she could now tell that the little old lady looked out of place behind the wheel of such a large vehicle. But of course, she was one of the primary caretakers of 27 children and needed something large enough to transport as many of them as she could. "So who's it going to be today?" Rose asked once she started the engine. "Today's definitely an arpeggio harmony kind of day," Sunset answered. "Good choice as always." Rose Petal pulled the cassette tape out from between their seats and put it in the van's tape deck. The sound of the string section opening the song filled the van, with the more dominant piano coming in shortly after. Sunset and Rose shared a love for classical music, much to their mutual surprise. Rose was amazed to find a child who was interested in anything other than pop music, while Sunset never mentioned that it was hardly something she'd consider classic, since it was still a very dominant music genre in Equestria. In particular, arpeggio harmony instantly became one of Sunset's favorites. She recognized the name as a long-dead equestrian composer, although she had only read about him and wasn't actually familiar with any of his music. Still, the coincidence in the name was very amusing, and she liked to imagine it was some sort of bizarre connection between the two worlds. Well, she might not have been very familiar with the arpeggio harmony who had lived in Equestria, but she was becoming very familiar with the one who lived on Earth. Sunset hummed along once the horn section came in, while Rose accompanied her by mimicking the strings. They were off-key, and would have ruined the music for anyone else listening in, but they were both smiling at each other. The short ride was made shorter by being filled with music. If they had been going anywhere else, Sunset would have been disappointed by the fact they only got to hear 15 minutes of the tape, but in light of meeting Crystal Clear, she was far less concerned with the music. Rose Petal walked with Sunset into the building. They stopped in the front room, where a receptionist checked them in before they parted ways. Sunset continued farther into the building with the receptionist to meet with Crystal, while Rose waved goodbye before heading back to New Horizons. Crystal Clear's door was open, his sign that he wasn't with anyone else. "Dr. Clear, Sunset Shimmer is here for her appointment," the receptionist said. He looked up from his paperwork and smiled. "Hello, Sunset. Come on in." He closed the folder he was looking over and set it off to the side. As Sunset entered the room, the receptionist closed the door behind her. "How are you doing today?" "Good," Sunset said, taking her seat. "Have you figured out anything about where the portal is?" "No," he said, causing her to frown. "But be patient. It might take some time." That was the same thing he had said last week. Sunset didn't know why it was so hard for him to get access to her records, assuming he didn't have them on hand already. The police would have documented where she was found, then it would be a simple matter of the two of them going there together to see if she could recognize where the portal had let her out. Sunset pushed those doubts away. Crystal Clear was the only person who could understand her, the only person who could possibly help her get back home. Okay, you'll let me know though, right? Of course I will, he said with an easy smile. I have to say, I'm happy to keep hearing good things about you. Yeah, well, it turns out it's not so hard to go along with what people want. Now that I actually have a reason to, Sunset finished in her head. She wouldn't accentuate that point. He was smart enough to realize there was only one reason Sunset was behaving herself without the reminder anyway. I'm sure you're finding things a good deal easier as well, he said knowingly. Yeah, you could say that. It's nice not being lectured every other day at least. Crystal chuckled. It does have an amount of appeal, yes. Okay, so I was wondering. Sunset smiled excitedly at the prospect of something that might make her time on Earth significantly better. Now that you know what's going on with me, could you maybe get them to take me out of kindergarten? I'll still go through the homeschooling classes and everything, so it shouldn't be a problem as far as the state's concerned. Crystal hesitated a moment. Well, you've made a lot of improvement, and no one could doubt that you far exceed the curriculum, he said with an overly soft tone. Sunset sighed. But, but it's only been a few weeks. While I'm very impressed with everything that I've heard and seen, I can't make that recommendation yet. But you know I'm not supposed to be in kindergarten. Sunset hated the way her voice sounded. She could hear the plea in it. She was asking for reassurance. Tell me again that you believe me. It's not even my call, I'm sorry to say. By this point, all I could do was give my professional opinion. Well, that has to count for something. Hell, I'd be happy if they moved me up a few grades. He seemed to consider his options for a moment. Sunset couldn't help but feel like it was just for show, but she waited patiently all the same. How about this? Finish kindergarten without any more problems, and I'll do everything I can to get another placement test for you. Where you wind up from there isn't my call, but I can pretty much guarantee it'll be higher than first grade. It was probably the best she could hope for, but it wasn't enough. The school year only started a few months ago, though. Come on, you have to be able to do something. I don't want to spend half my time in this world with a bunch of kids. Maybe I can make something happen sooner. I'm not promising anything, but I'll see what I can do. Just like you'll see what you can do about finding the portal, Sunset thought bitterly. But she couldn't do anything to risk burning her only bridge, so all she said was, "Thank you." Content to put the matter aside, Crystal Clear nodded. "You're welcome. So, is there anything else you'd like to talk about? Anything new happened in the past week?" "No, not really." Even with news of Equestria, Crystal Clear always kept a large focus on her day-to-day experiences. She wasn't sure how he could still be interested in that, but guessed that it was just part of his job. All the same, she knew he would be interested in learning more about Equestria if she brought it up. "Oh, I don't think I told you about equestrian weather yet." Sunset grinned excitedly as she told him about how ponies controlled the weather in major cities, happily answering any of his questions. While he was never the one to bring up Equestria, his interest was easy enough to see. He had questions about everything, and was particularly interested in the details of how everything actually worked. Sunset suspected it was because of the same inquisitive nature that led him to becoming a psychologist. Fortunately, he was talking to one of the only ponies who understood why things in Equestria worked. Most ponies were just content to accept magic was behind everything, but Sunset understood the principles behind the magic itself. She struggled a bit with some of the questions, which was made doubly frustrating by the fact that she was sure she'd known those answers before, and that Crystal Clear made little notes with each failure. "It's just noting what to look into once we get through the portal," Sunset told herself. She didn't like the other option she thought of. The session was similar to the past few. Sunset talked about Equestria and felt a growing sense of concern mixed into her relief. Still, it was largely positive, and she was feeling pretty good about things as the conversation went on. Almost good enough that she was tempted to ignore a surprise chance when it presented itself. Almost. Towards the end of their session, Crystal's secretary knocked on his door to tell him he had a phone call. He normally wouldn't have taken it, but with their increasingly familiar relationship, Sunset was able to convince him easily enough that she didn't mind waiting. When he left the room, Sunset walked around to the other side of the desk. Moving any of his notes would be too risky, so she just looked at what he had been writing. Sure enough, it consisted of the things Sunset hadn't been able to answer. She had known that, but alongside it was written, "Press further." If it had been, "Find out more," or "Learn more later," or even nothing at all, Sunset wouldn't have thought anything of it. But why would he press further when she already told him she didn't know those things? She had a feeling, but she would need more evidence. And she knew exactly where to look. Her case file. Unfortunately, the one he'd been reviewing earlier had been someone else's, but next to it was a small key, just big enough for a filing cabinet. She shoved it in her pocket and returned to her seat. Crystal Clear returned, apologized, and took his seat. Sunset didn't want to look suspicious, so she began with small talk. "Everything okay?" Sunset asked. She kept her tone, half joking. He'd never believed she was genuinely concerned. "Yes, it wasn't anything urgent. My son asking if he could go out with some friends tonight." Sunset continued to craft the perfect amount of interest, only a little so that he would keep talking, taking care to make sure it was not so much that he'd realize she was just stalling for time. "I didn't know you had a son." "Yes, he's 14. Good. You don't wear a wedding ring." Friendly or not, she couldn't pass the chance to make him squirm a little. Crystal didn't seem to mind. "Divorced," he said with a smile. He held up his left hand, showing a barely visible tan line around his ring finger. It was hardly noticeable, so it must have been years ago. Although Sunset was tempted to dig a little deeper, she was wary of how far was too far. Plus, she had places to be. "A keeper like you? No way." She stood up before he could reply. "Anyway, I'll be right back." Bathroom. Crystal nodded. "Okay, it's down the hall, to the left, I know." Sunset had taken care to learn the layout of the building, as well as any other she frequently went to. Not just what rooms went where, but who went to which ones. She hadn't snuck into the restricted section of the Royal Canterlot Archives by chance, after all. So Sunset walked out of the room and down the hall. She reached a turning point where the bathroom was to the left, and she went straight instead. With Crystal in his office and the receptionist at the front, the odds that anyone was in the records room were low. And if someone was there, then she was just a little girl who was looking for the bathroom. She opened the door with confidence, as if she was supposed to be there, and found it was empty. There was no time to lose, so she immediately set to work. Thankfully, most of the work was done for her. Dr. Crystal Clear was labeled at the top of one of the filing cabinets, and the second drawer from the bottom was labeled M to S. Thankful that whether she was under Sunset or Shimmer, she would be in that cabinet, Sunset inserted the key, turned it, and was hardly surprised when it opened for her. Crystal never struck her as someone who was terribly concerned with security. She leafed through the files as quickly as possible, finding her own soon enough. It was surprisingly thick, considering they hadn't had too many sessions. She was very tempted to steal the whole thing, but that would get her caught. She flipped to the first of his notes. "Subject has clearly shown signs of generalized dissociative amnesia, with a strong possibility of either bipolar disorder or even dissociative identity disorder. High levels of intelligence with stunted emotional development, coupled with dissociative amnesia, suggest a likely abusive home life." As interesting as it was to see Crystal's thoughts on their early interactions, Sunset had a goal in mind. She flipped through to the last few pages. Breakthrough. Subject has created a past consisting of her being a magical pony from another world. She is capable of providing very in-depth logic to back her claim, which is unsurprising given her high intellect. Too early for full prognosis, but could potentially be schizophrenia. Unclear at the moment if this is caused by the dissociative amnesia or vice versa. Attempting to go along with the delusions in the hopes that she can be brought to the conclusion that such a world is simply not possible. Sunset closed the file, placing it neatly where she found it. She shut the drawer, locked it up, and tucked the key safely into her pocket. Calmly, she walked out of the room, silently closed the door behind her, and made her way back to Crystal Clear's office. He smiled as she entered, while she took her seat as if nothing was wrong. She even smiled back. He had no idea what was coming. "We seem to be running low on time," Crystal Clear said, as if that were a bad thing. "Is there anything else you'd like to discuss?" There were many. "Nothing in particular. Do you have any other questions for me?" "Oh, I could always think of something to discuss, I'm sure," Crystal said with a shrug. But for now, let's focus on the upcoming week. Sunset raised an eyebrow. That sounds like homework. I thought you wanted the extra workload. Nope, Sunset grinned. I want to be away from those kids. I'm indifferent to the extra workload. Unfortunately, you'll have to deal with both for now. Crystal Clear folded his hands on the desk and leaned across it. If you really want to get out of kindergarten, you're going to have to prove to your teacher that you're ready to move on. Sunset shrugged. Please, I can finger paint like a damn pro. I'm talking about how you interact with the other kids. Crystal stopped to think for a moment. And not swearing would definitely be a good thing, too. Other kids. How did she ever think he was on her side? I'll be on my best behavior, promise. I don't doubt it. I really do mean it when I say you've done an excellent job these past few weeks. But while being neutral towards others might be enough to keep you out of trouble, if you really want to move on, you'll need to do more. If I didn't know any better, I'd say you want me to make friends. Crystal grinned. Oh no, anything but that, he said sarcastically. Sunset just grinned to match him. Well, I can't make any promises, but I'll see what I can do. She could remember someone else who always wanted her to make friends. Same pony who had told her to try being more open. Crystal checked his clock. Looks like our time is up. Knowing Miss Rose, she'll be very punctual. Let's not keep her waiting. As he stood up, Sunset carefully let the key fall to the floor. When she rose to follow him, she kicked it over to his side of the desk, near the side where she had found it. He would never question it. Whenever he noticed it lying on the floor, he would simply assume it fell. They walked out into the front waiting room, where Rose Petal was sitting with a book. She smiled as they approached. How'd everything go? Good, Sunset answered. It was true in a fashion. It was better to know that Crystal Clear was a lying, manipulative bastard than to just keep pretending he wasn't. As they said their goodbyes, Sunset remained wholly cordial. She didn't let any sign of her foul mood show until she climbed into the van, and even then she just turned to stare out the window. I kept the tape paused for when you got back, Rose Petal said. Thanks, Sunset mumbled, but she didn't really care. Rose could clearly tell, but she didn't say anything. She unpaused the tape as they drove off and tried to get Sunset to hum along with her. Sunset just stared resolutely out the window the whole time, not noticing the music coming out of the speakers or Rose Petal's rendition of it. The short drive back to the orphanage was filled with thoughts on how to best proceed. Celestia may have been wrong about opening up to others, but she was undeniably good at what she did, and Sunset had been her best student, in part because she had paid attention to the lessons her teacher never meant for her to learn as well. Everyone needs help sometimes. I know I certainly do. Yes, that was true, wasn't it? Celestia was impressive, but she didn't run a country by herself. Still, she didn't go around telling any pony else her secrets, now did she? No, for all her hypocritical talk about opening up to others, Celestia kept her thoughts extremely well guarded. Even Sunset struggled to see through her most of the time, and she had known the princess for half her life. Need others to accomplish my goals, Sunset told herself. It was a hard truth for her to accept, something she had never been able to come to terms with in the past. I need others, but I cannot trust them, so I'll just have to make them do what I want. It wasn't hard. Sunset had practically been bred for this. Her parents had taught her from a young age how to say the right things to the right ponies, lest she become a threat to their precious reputations. Then, once she became Celestia's gifted student, every day became a trial in trying to study her mentor's subtle cues to learn her hidden secrets. It turned out that other ponies became much easier to read. And now she had another tool. While she loathed being trapped as a 5-year-old, it did give her certain advantages. She was a cute, innocent little girl. People wanted to protect her, and there was no way she could be guilty of manipulating everyone around her. How foolish she had been to squander that for so long. By the time they arrived, Sunset had a plan in mind, but before she could open her door, Rose Petal stopped her. Sunset, is everything okay? Sunset took a moment. Things were going to change for her. She wasn't just going to go along with everything that they wanted from her, but she also didn't really benefit from going back to blowing off everyone around her. From here on out, she was going to be planning her responses to maximize her goals. So how to respond to Rose Petal? She was someone with a lot of power over Sunset's living situation, so she'd do well to stay in her good graces for the time being. She decided on a small smile, since her detachment on the ride home meant she couldn't possibly convince her nothing was wrong. I'm okay. Today was just a little exhausting. Rose Petal seemed concerned, but that was expected. Sunset wasn't trying to dispel all her worries. She just wanted to do enough that there wouldn't be further questions. You know, Sunset, I may not be a professional therapist, but I'm always here if you want to talk. I'm pretty good at it after all these years. Sunset widened her smile a bit, but averted her eyes, looking slightly sheepish. Thank you. I'm really okay, though. I just want to rest for a bit. Rose kept looking worried for a moment, then it melted away into a smile. Okay. I'll come get you at dinner time. Sunset thanked her again for good measure, then exited the van. She felt a sense of accomplishment that the interaction had gone exactly how she wanted it to, but it had hardly been the first time she'd done something like that. The bigger test was still to come. She entered the building and made for her room, but she didn't plan on staying there. She dug around in a drawer for a moment until she came across a business card. Violet Dusk, social worker, was printed on it, but more importantly was the information underneath. The address for her office, two phone numbers, a fax number, and an email address. Although it might have been better to use a phone in the office, that would require going through one of the caretakers. Do that, and Rose would find out, which might cause her to worry. The situation could be handled without her, so Sunset decided to take her chances with the other kids. Sunset never used the lounge area, but that was where the phone was. Fortunately, it was mostly used by older kids, while the kids her age were off playing silly little games. Sunset's interactions with the older kids had been more limited and would likely be smoother as a result. Unfortunately, she arrived to find someone already on the phone. She chose a seat nearby and decided to wait it out. He seemed to be talking to his girlfriend, and kept looking around to make sure no one heard him every time he said, "I love you." The idiot was too love-struck to realize his friends kept snickering every time he did. They droned on for ages about the stupidest things, and Sunset was almost ready to give up and come back later by the time he hung up. Before anyone else could take their turn on the phone, Sunset practically ran over to claim it. The idiot's friends were too busy taunting him about how much he loved his girlfriend for any of them to notice Sunset, which suited her just fine. She picked up the phone and looked at the number pad. Shit, she had no idea how to use the damn thing. She was about to try guessing when she remembered her new outlook. That idiot could work a phone, and he could show her how to. "Excuse me," she said in an intentionally small voice. He turned away from his friends to see what she wanted. Of course, they had seen each other around, but they had never spoken directly. "I don't know how to use this." He looked at her quizzically. "Who are you trying to call?" "None of your damn business." Sunset held out the business card. Her. She was far from the only kid at New Horizons with a social worker. Still, she didn't want to alarm them since that could get back to the caretakers. "I left my lunchbox in her car, and I need it for school on Monday." He smiled somewhat condescendingly, but it didn't bother Sunset. In fact, it was just what she wanted. He saw her as nothing but an innocent little girl, and the situation was hardly worth repeating to anyone. It's not that hard. You just pick up the phone and dial the numbers. Rather than wait for Sunset to do it, he dialed them for her. You should hear it ringing now. Sunset pressed the phone to her ear and heard it ring. She smiled and nodded. "Thank you." "No problem. Just hang it up when you're done." He turned to leave with his friends, clearing out the immediate area for her. There were other kids around, but they were all staring intently at the TV, which was on the other side of the room. As long as she was quiet, no one would hear her. Violet Dusk speaking. Sunset couldn't help but smile. Technology really was its own kind of magic. "Hello, Violet. It's Sunset. Sunset Shimmer." "Hello, Sunset. Is everything okay?" This would be a little bit trickier. Violet couldn't be fooled by putting forth a cute persona. Sunset needed to actually convince her. "I'm worried about my meetings with Crystal Clear. I don't feel comfortable talking with him anymore." "Why not?" "There's supposed to be absolute confidentiality between a patient and a psychologist, right? Like, that's a law, right?" "Yes, that's a law. Is there some reason you think he isn't following that law?" "Yeah, he's told me about his other patients. He told me about how Dewdrop's parents didn't want her and abused her, and that Sugar Breeze's mom is also still alive, but she's addicted to drugs and just sends her toys and stuff. I don't even think she knows that. And he told me, okay, that's enough. I see what you mean." Sunset smiled. Technically, Crystal Clear had only told her about Dewdrop. Sunset had overheard some of the caretakers talking about Sugar Breeze when one of her mom's packages came in one day. But Sunset wasn't trying to get rid of the caretakers, and she knew both of them had monthly visits with Crystal Clear. Who was to say where Sunset got the information, after all? But even though it sounded like the doubt was taking hold, Sunset had to be sure it would play out how she wanted. So, what now? I'm not talking to somebody who's just going to go tell his other patients about me. I understand your concerns. Give me a few days to look into this and I'll get back to you. I promise we'll have this all sorted out before your next meeting with him. Okay? Perfect. Yes, thank you. And Sunset? Yeah? Do not repeat this to anyone else, including Dewdrop and Sugar Breeze and anyone else that you know things about. You should never have been told about that, and it's very personal information. Do you understand? Personal information sounded like the type of thing that could get her very far. Sunset would need to collect a lot more of it about anyone she possibly could. You got it. I won't tell a soul, I promise. It was 3 days later when Rose Petal informed Sunset that she wouldn't be seeing Crystal Clear anymore. All she would say when Sunset asked why was that they were worried he didn't have her best interest in mind. It didn't matter. Sunset knew the reason with or without confirmation. The following week, Violet Dusk came to bring her to her psychology appointment. Sunset knew she wasn't going to be done with them completely, but still felt better about seeing someone new. Is it going to be one of the doctors at the same office? Sunset asked once they were in her car. Probably not, but we don't know yet, Violet answered. We need to figure out who the best fit for you is. She flashed a smile, her usual sign of encouragement. But it'll be someone more trustworthy than Crystal Clear. How do you know? Sunset wasn't particularly concerned, but it would help her if it looked like she was. I'm personally going to be looking into their work history once someone is decided on, and unless I give the okay, they won't ever see you. Turns out Crystal Clear had some similar problems in the past. Nothing recent, or else I would have known about it, but I'll look into the new doctor much more thoroughly. Sunset watched the orphanage disappear behind them as they drove. So where are we going today, then? Today you'll be evaluated by a psychiatrist. You've met her before, Diamond Facet. She's a good doctor, and she'll give her a much better idea of what to do next. Okay. They drove in silence for a while. Sunset liked Violet better than most people, but she did miss Rose Petal's classical music tapes. It wasn't so bad, though. Sunset needed the time to prepare. It would be amazing if somehow Crystal Clear's notes about her would be kept to herself, but she doubted that would be the case. No, she was going to have to talk to someone else about Equestria, so she was going to need a plan going in. Nervous? Violet asked after a while. It took Sunset a second to realize Violet was asking if she was worried about talking to another psychologist in general, rather than anything to do with Equestria. A little. I understand. Violet glanced over to Sunset, showing another small smile. As far as I could find out, Crystal Clear hasn't told anyone about your sessions. We are removing you as a precaution. Violet paused for Sunset to reply, but continued when she remained silent. You did the right thing. I know you don't have an easy time with trusting people, but I am looking out for you. You can tell me about any problems you're having with anyone. Trust Violet? Sunset had thought she could trust Crystal, but she was wrong, and she'd learned better. She couldn't trust anyone, only try to use them to her advantage. So what's going to happen to Crystal Clear now? If Violet was concerned that Sunset had avoided answering her, she didn't show it. I don't know. I reported my concern, so he's out of my hands now. None of the other children I work with are patients of his, so his future is not my concern. Sunset smirked, remembering how she had said something similar before. Only me? Violet grinned. Not her usual smile that always made Sunset wonder how someone so unemotional had come to work with children, but an actual grin. That's right, only you. They pulled into the hospital parking lot. Violet didn't even attempt to find a spot near the front, choosing the safer bet of a marginally close one rather than waste time driving around for the chance at something better. Once they were out, Violet locked the doors, checked the locks, then led the way into the building. The first time Sunset had seen the hospital had been an amazing experience. She had been terrified, of course, but amazed nonetheless. But now that she was more familiar with human technology, the whole thing seemed exceptionally dull. At the much smaller office Crystal Clear worked in, she would check in and see him immediately thereafter. But even with an appointment, it seemed that was not a luxury afforded to the larger hospital. Everywhere she looked, Sunset saw nurses, doctors, and technicians running around to get to their next client. Violet and Sunset just sat patiently reading their books while most of the people around them complained about the long wait. Sunset Shimmer? Sunset looked up to see a technician calling her name. Over here, Violet answered in Sunset's place. The tech smiled warmly. Dr. Facet is ready to see you now. Sunset stood up while Violet remained sitting. It seemed she would be speaking with Diamond Facet alone. Remember, Sunset, Violet said before she could go. The most important thing is to answer anything she asks you honestly. This isn't the kind of test you can fail at. We just need to know how things have progressed since you've been seeing crystal clear. Sunset nodded, then turned to follow the tech. He led her to an office which Sunset vaguely recognized. She remembered the woman who greeted her much better. Hello, Sunset. It's been a little while. Hello, Dr. Facet, Sunset said. People liked being greeted with their proper titles, especially from little kids. It was endearing to see a kid who knew how to address an adult, and Sunset wanted to endear herself to Diamond Facet. The tech left them alone, closing the door. Violet gestured for Sunset to take a seat, so she did. And how are you doing these days, Sunset? Diamond asked. Small talk, easy enough to navigate. I'm doing a lot better. And how are you, Dr. Facet? Diamond smiled at the polite question. No doubt she remembered Sunset's rudeness the last time they spoke. That would actually work in her favor, though. It would show how much better she was these days. I'm doing very well, thank you, Diamond said. Now, you were seeing Dr. Clear until recently. What did you think about him? Sunset lost her smile. She couldn't play the innocent little girl there. Diamond probably knew Sunset was the cause for Violet's investigation. I thought he was nice at first. He didn't seem so nice after a while, though. A carefully planned hesitation to make Sunset look like she felt guilty about telling the truth. Well, he was still really nice, but I know he told me things he shouldn't have. I didn't want him telling other people about me. Diamond nodded. Yes, that was a very bad thing for him to do. But that's behind you now, and you won't have to worry about that again. Sunset nodded and let a little of her smile back. She didn't want to dwell on the circumstances surrounding her conflict with Crystal. I know. Diamond smiled. She was getting the exact reaction she wanted, seeing that Sunset was feeling all the appropriate emotions. What kinds of things did you and Crystal talk about? He would ask about how I was doing, if I was getting along with the other kids, and listening to my teachers and the caretakers at New Horizons. Sunset fidgeted in her seat, giving a clear sign that she was hiding something. Diamond Facet knew about Equestria. Her question had confirmed it. Sunset would just have to frame her explanation properly. Is there anything else you two talked about? Um, Sunset looked down as she spoke. He, uh, he asked about the books I was reading. He would always find me new books to read. Diamond Facet leaned across the table and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Did you and Dr. Clear ever have any secrets? Sunset admired her attempt. If she were actually 5 years old, it might have even worked. But Sunset wasn't going to be goaded into spilling a secret because an adult was making it seem exciting. Sunset was going to spill a secret in her own time because that was what she was planning on doing all along. Um, I don't know. Sunset, you know you can tell me about anything at all, right? Diamond waited for a moment, so Sunset gave a hesitant nod. What secret things did you and Dr. Clear talk about? Sunset looked resolutely at the desk and mumbled her answer. Equestria. Oh, and what is Equestria? Diamond asked, feigning ignorance. Sunset had barely pronounced the foreign word. If Diamond had been paying as much attention to her actions as Sunset was, she would have asked Sunset to repeat herself louder. It's... Sunset wished she could blush on command. Instead, she counted on the rest of her body to convey that she was embarrassed to talk about the subject. It's a magic world with ponies. And is Equestria a real place? I... I don't know. You don't? Diamond playfully exaggerated her disbelief. No, Sunset answered. But you did tell Dr. Clear it was real, didn't you? Letting the details through, counting on the fact that Sunset would be too young to realize Diamond Facet knew more than she should. I... yes. Why did you tell him that if you don't know? Sunset didn't answer. She bit her lip, making sure the motion was large enough that Diamond Facet would see it. It's okay, Sunset. You're not in trouble. No matter what the answer is, it's okay as long as it's the truth. Because... because he really wanted to know. Sunset maintained her gaze towards the ground. He liked hearing about Equestria. He always asked about it. Violet smiled her understanding. Sunset couldn't tell if it was because she was buying it or because she wanted Sunset to trust her. Sunset, did you make up everything about Equestria? The final piece to the puzzle Sunset was crafting. I dreamt about it. Did you tell Dr. Clear that it was a dream? I... no. Sunset looked into her face for only a moment before turning away again. It... it felt real when I woke up. Can you explain what you mean? Diamond asked. Please, tell me everything that happened when you first told Dr. Clear about Equestria. It's a hallmark of good psychology. Diamond wanted Sunset to clarify without offering any suggestions, since that could skew her answer. Sunset needed to convey that Crystal hadn't done that. Well, Dr. Clear and Mrs. Dusk took me to see a pony at Sweet Apple Acres. It was scary. I had dreams after that about ponies, but they could talk and they were nice, but sometimes they start nice but turn into bad dreams, and they don't feel like dreams when I wake up. Dr. Clare came to talk to me after a bad dream, and I told him about it. You told him about the dream? Diamond asked. Yes, but, well, I didn't. I thought. You thought it was real? Sunset nodded. And what did Dr. Clear do when you told him about this dream? He asked questions. Sunset carefully reiterated certain information, hoping to put forth the idea that Crystal had pushed for more information instead of letting Sunset volunteer it, leading to her constructing an elaborate lie. He asked a lot of questions about Equestria. He was happy when I told him more about it. Did Dr. Clear ever say that Equestria was real? Sunset paused to think for a moment. I don't remember, but he really wanted to know about it, so I think he believed it was real. And do you believe Equestria is a real place, Sunset? Sunset blinked a few times. He looked into Diamond Facet's eyes as she gave her absolute affirmative answer. No, she said. There's no such thing as Equestria.